it. And we're not going to stop it. Also not going to stop it. Ash Hanley finishes it off.
Jack Bird with his first Leeds try.
It's Friday night, it's Leeds Rhinos match night. Welcome along to Matchday Live, your Leeds Rhinos game day preview show. And I always say it's a big game day because every game's massive in the Betfred Super League, but no game is quite as big as when Leeds Rhinos take on Wigan Warriors like they do tonight at the Brick Community Stadium. We cannot wait to take on the upcoming 2026 Challenge Cup finalists. But what will the Rhinos be able to do? Will they be able to continue that winning streak that sees us rank at the top of the table after 10 rounds? My name's Dan Hawkhead, chatting through and previewing this one alongside BBC Radio Leeds' Jack Conlon. As always, Jack, these games don't get much bigger in the Betfred Super League. I would argue maybe Leeds Saints games, but Leeds versus Wigan, it's an absolute box office clash every year.
Always is. Two clubs with great histories, in Super League, but also pre-Super League as well. Two massive clubs, and that has always been the case. There's been some amazing contests down the years. You look back as far as I think we've talked about it already this year at times. The sort of 2012, 2013 periods where they met in playoff semi-finals, in finals. There's been so many games down the years that you can pick out as big contests and big clashes between Leeds and Wigan, and I think going into this one tonight is no different, to be honest. Leeds on the run they're on at the minute, top of the table, of course. Wigan, you would probably put as massive underdogs before last week. That performance against St Helens is sort of it's more like the Wigan we're used to. It's not a Wigan we've seen in a fair few weeks, for a few reasons, I think. But yeah, I think that win against St Helens for them last week, that, as you mentioned, puts them into the Challenge Cup final. It's turned the tables a bit on this game and on what people think of Wigan right now. And yeah, I think it sets this game up beautifully. Does that? Those two sort of contrasting teams at the minute.
Do you think there was a bit of I know there's Matt Pete's comments after the game, but there was a little bit of revenge for what happened in that rivals round game, and that they went out to not only prove a point in getting through to another major final under Pete, but actually getting one over a very close rival?
I think so, yeah. And I found it fascinating what he said after the game. The couple of sort of digs that he gave at St Helens, and that very much sort of gave the impression of a man who's been stewing on that result in particular. They had that run of defeats, which included, uncharacteristic losses against Huddersfield, against Castleford, but that rivals round defeat against St Helens in the middle of that. And yeah, those comments after the game and the way that you could tell that he enjoyed that win so much, very much strike me as a man who, has been stewing on that defeat against St Helens for a fair few weeks. And why not? He's a Wigan lad himself. He's been part of that club for so long, even before he became head coach. He knows what it means to be on both sides of that rivalry as the victors and as the losers as well. So yeah, no, I absolutely think that was the case. And like I said, I think no one really expected that from them. Given how both of those sides have been trending this season, particularly in the last couple of months, everyone, I think, had Saints as bankers to win. I think you could say the same about Warrington over Hull KR as well, which was a good surprise result in that Challenge Cup semi-final. So yeah, I don't think anyone had Wigan down as their winners before the game, but that performance very much shows that despite that bad run of form, Wigan are still the top quality outfit that everyone has come to expect in recent years and are absolutely going to be a threat to the Rhinos.
Well, they rank fifth coming into today's game against the Rhinos. Like Jack said, off the back of a big win over Bradford last time out, having had those 4 losses, which is the longest run since 2021 under Adrian Lamb. It's the longest winless run while the Warriors have been under Matt Pete. And Matt Pete has made one change. We'll go through the squads now. Has made one change to his 21-man squad, and that was Ethan Havard coming in for Liam Farrell. Do you think there's a little bit of thinking for next week's cup final, giving Havard a bit of a run out?
Very possibly, yeah. It's an interesting sort of decision to make that, I think, from Matt Pete to take out Farrell, who, you know, he's played a lot of minutes this year. He's one of the oldest players in that squad. He's obviously the captain as well, but has played a lot in the centre, which copped a lot of criticism. You know, he's not a natural centre. I think everyone could see that. He can fill in there when needed, but they were relying on him a lot there with Jake Wardle being out. Now that he's back in, you know, it gives a bit more balance to that left edge, I think, for Wigan. And I think there is a bit of thinking of looking ahead to the cup final when it comes to someone like a Farrell. As I say, he's done a lot of minutes, he's done a lot of hard work, a lot of hard graft already this season, and you know, to just put him on ice for a week, I think is probably a smart move. Now, how that changes the complexion of their side will be really interesting to watch, because Ethan Havard's not played for a while. You know, will he be brought straight back in? You know, will he try and, you know, get some minutes in the legs before Wembley, so that he can be a viable option for that squad? Not sure. I think Sam Walters will probably push out to the second row spot to fill in for where Farrell will be. You know, Walters played in the front row last week, so that'll open a spot there, and it's whether or not they put Cade Ellis back in that position, in that middle, whether they go with Havard. That's the only real sort of change that I can see happening. If Havard's not there, you know, they'll probably call him one of their young forwards. Keane McDermott is someone they like. Lucas Mason's been in and around the mix for a fair old while, still been knocking on the door. He's yet to debut, but he's been in that 21-man squad for weeks on end now.
Really
Tom Forber is still there if they want to give Brad O'Neill an option of a rest. So they've got options there to sort of plug that gap, but I think Walters will certainly shift into that other second row spot, and it's just who they really go for in that other front row position.
Ollie Partington as well is definitely a viable option, having played in the semi-final at that spot. Moving on to the Rhinos, 3 changes for them coming into this week. Harry Newman is back, Riley Lum and Tom Nicholson-Watson in as well, while Jack Bird, Ethan O'Neill and Harley Thomas drop out. Of course, Jack Bird having slight knee surgery, I believe, was what the club has output this week, and Ethan O'Neill's replaced Harry over at Hull FC. It's been a few weeks since we've seen Harry back in the team. How do you think the dynamic will look with him? Because he's a very different player to Jack Bird, isn't he? He's very different in what he brings to the Rhinos side compared to how Jack's been playing in the last few weeks.
He is, but I think this is the perfect example of you know, when Harry Newman first made that loan move to Hull FC a few weeks back, you know, I remember some of the responses to it were, it took a lot of people by surprise, really, that they'd let him go and make that move. But as has been sort of mentioned in the weeks since by Brad Arthur mainly in his press conferences, you know, that is a method and a way of keeping those players fit. You know, of keeping them match fit, of keeping Super League minutes in the legs. And we're seeing the same with Jeremiah Matautia. Who knows, you know, where he might be needed down the line this season. Ethan O'Neill as well gets that chance this week to get some first team minutes in the legs. And this is exactly the reason that happened was, you know, Jack Bird now drops out for a couple of weeks. I think the thinking behind that is very smart as well, I've got to say. He'll miss 2 games instead of 4 because of the 2 breaks for the semi-final that we've just had and for the final in a couple of weeks' time as well. You know, so he misses those chunks as opposed to any longer term you know, absence, and I think that's very clever. But as we say, on the flip side, Newman comes back in off the back of 3 weeks where he's played in that Hull FC side, done it tough at times, just given their form and their results and the bit of disarray that's surrounding that club at the minute. But regardless, he keeps that certain degree of fitness that you just wouldn't get if you are just training or playing reserves. You know, he keeps the Super League match fitness up, and that was the crucial part for me of that move, and I think of the Rhinos thinking as well to keep him sort of in the fold in that sense. So you'd hope that he comes straight back in and his fitness level is the same. It might be, you know, the only thing that might be a bit different is the systems that he's playing in. You know, Leeds play a very different brand of rugby to Hull, but at the same time, Newman's been training and playing within that structure, that framework for over a year now under Brad Arthur. So that really shouldn't change. It should just, you know, he should just sort of adapt straight back into that innate bit of play that he's got in him. So I think that's a really interesting change. I think it'll be interesting as well to see what Newman's response is. Doesn't strike me as a kind of guy who would be pleased with being dropped. He doesn't, does he? No. So, you know, there'll be a bit of fire in his belly, you'd expect, to prove a point, show that that shirt, that position should be his, and hopefully give Brad Arthur a real dilemma in a few weeks' time when Jack Bird is back fit and all of a sudden he's got 5 players for 4 positions again. So that in an ideal world is what you want. And he's a competitor, isn't he, as well, Newman? So, he won't take a backward step and he'll be relishing that opportunity, you feel, to go up against Jake Wardle and that Wigan side.
And he absolutely loves playing against Wigan. I think there was a post about this week, him scoring his 2 tries in 2023. He's a man who is definitely, this fixture's just written up for him, absolutely. 250 games as well for Jake Connor. So congratulations to Jake. Should he be in the starting 17 tonight? I'd be surprised if he didn't. But just moving back onto our opponents, Wigan. Key player wise, we said we could pick anybody in the starting 17 for Wigan because they've got the talent. They're just so rewarding when you look at not just the international team, but looking at what the league's like. They top the charts week after week. Obviously, have struggled with where they are, but it all starts with the spine. It starts with those creative players. Let's pick them apart one by one. So we'll start with Jay Field because I feel like that's almost the best starting point, isn't it? With the electric fullback. Your thoughts on just how good he's been, especially without Bevan French alongside him.
I was about to say that he's had to step up, hasn't he? In French's absence, when they've got a full complement of players, those two are nigh on unstoppable at times. Just with the agility, how. The pace, how quickly they can change direction just at the drop of a hat. Those two are they're your Mavericks, aren't they, in that side? I was going to talk about Harry Smith though, because for me he's been the real missing link for them in the past few weeks as Harry Smith. And I think it's sometimes underrated, the actual effect and impact that he has on that Wigan side, because while you've got your Fields and your Frenches and you can chuck Jack Farrimond in there as well, they need someone to, while you've got those players that very much play what's in front of them, have got those killer side steps, have got the pace, those players only really work if you've got someone to steady the ship. And Smith is the perfect player for that in that Wigan side. You look at his kicking game, there's no one else in that Wigan side that kicks like him.
No. And
that's got that part of their game. He's got a wand of a left foot and can, again, put it on a sixpence, no matter where he's on the field, seemingly, often. And I think that's a really underrated trait that he brings into that squad. A squad where there's so many elite players that it's easy for a player to get lost. But Harry Smith, I think, always comes to the forefront whenever he is in that squad. I think as well, you've seen when he's been absent in the past few weeks, they've really struggled in that respect to have any control over a game. Even when they've been up on the scoreboard, they've not looked themselves and they've not looked in control. I was there for the Huddersfield and the Castleford games, which in fairness, I think he did play at least one of them, if not both of them, in that time. So that I guess that part of my argument goes out the window there. But you can tell when Harry Smith's not there, they do lose that element of control. Just simply for the fact that Farrimond's not that kind of halfback. He's very much plays what he sees, reacts to what the defence does. He goes at gaps if they're there. Fields similar in that he's not a controlling pivot, and they've really struggled to properly plug that gap. The players they've tried to do that, I think George Marsden, the young teenager that they brought in, has been the best example of that, but still you can't put all that pressure on the shoulders of a 17-year-old.
No.
That's just not going to work. And Adam Kieran, who has filled in there as well, just isn't a natural halfback.
He's moved into the outside backs, hasn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
He's a better centre than he is halfback.
Without a doubt, and I think you can tell when Smith is not there that you've got a rookie halfback that plays what he sees and a centre trying to be a halfback. And I think that's been a crucial part of their attack and what has perhaps undone them in some of those games. But Smith being back in just gives them that semblance of structure, just gives them that cool head that, if they've got a set that's not really going anywhere, they can give it to him and he'll ping a kick into a corner and all of a sudden they can get themselves on the front foot via their defence. So I think he's a real linchpin in that side, and I think you see the best of Farrimond, the best of Field when Smith is in there, because he takes that pressure off their shoulders. They don't feel like they're having to make up for someone else's job, and they can just play their games, and that is when Wigan are at their most dangerous for me.
You know that I like a stat, Jack, and I think, speaking of Harry Smith, you'll like this stat. So I went back and had a look, because obviously like you said, his kicking game is unbelievable. In terms of his kick try assists, I went back and looked. So from his debut in 2019 to the present day, there's only one player who has had more kick try assists than Harry Smith, and that is Mark Sneyd.
Okay.
Who has 50. Smith has 36. But I just think he's not just kicking for the sake of kicking. He's not just got a wand of a left boot that's doing just what it needs to do. He's creating chances. He's scoring tries. I mean, the try at the weekend for, I think it was either one of the Farriman tries, or there was one where he just dabbed it and it just curled away and walked into the path of a Wigan player. It's bamboozling stuff that he's just got the ability to just go, yeah, I'll do that.
He's a player who you can tell has spent his entire childhood just with the ball in his hands and kicking it.
Yeah.
And just working out how to kick a rugby league ball so that it bounces a certain way, or and I think you can sometimes tell the players that have done that. Sneed's another one where you can tell just with the technique they've got. Luke Gale was another one that springs to mind, with the way that he always played and the way he kicked the ball, that you can tell. Danny Brough as well. We could reel off names.
We could reel off the names of the 2010s.
But I think there's some players you can tell when they kick a ball, it's just so natural, and they've been doing that for their entire lives, and you can tell they've just spent hours upon hours. When everyone else has gone home from training, they've been there for hours and then just kicking the ball and trying to manipulate it and get it to go in certain directions and bounce in certain ways. And he very much falls into that category for me, does Harry Smith.
He absolutely does. Just touching on his opposite halfback in Jack Farriman, a real talent that's been biding his time at Wigan. He's finally got it seems like he's got the chance to really sort of spread his wings a bit. He's got 12 appearances this year, 5 tries, which is the most appearances had in a single season. He's provided the tries alongside appearances, despite in the last 2 years, but not without really breaking into the team. But in terms of a talent for the future, I know we've touched on the young halfbacks and young players coming through in this league in previous episodes. But actually, as one of those lads that, when you've talked about Harvey Smith being a potential England shout, where do you put Jack Farriman in terms of those new players, those young players that are lighting up the league?
He's almost the perfect problem for Matt P, is Jack Farriman, just for the fact that they've got a player there who's come through the Wigan system, and they are also proud, as they should be, of the players that they constantly produce, and that production line that is constantly just reeling out player after player after player, quality after quality. And Farriman, I think, has almost stepped beyond that now. He's no longer an emerging youngster because of what he's shown. He is a Super League player and needs to be playing regular Super League minutes. And it's via the misfortune of Bevan French this season that he's getting that run in the side. It's probably the best we've seen of him so far.
I agree.
In the fleeting chances he's had up until this point, and they have been fleeting, again, just because whenever anyone's injured in that Wigan spine, he tends to be the player that just drops in there. He's shown glimpses of what he can do, but now he's getting that proper run and he's looking all the better for it. And I call it the perfect problem, because once Bevan French is back, what happens then? That's the real question for Matty P. I remember, I think it was a game at Castleford last season when he was asked about Farriman and what do you do with him when everyone else is fit? Is there an opportunity to go out on loan? He sort of said that, I'm paraphrasing, but he was almost sort of reluctant to let him go out because Wigan, and I think Leeds are similar to a degree, very much back their system and like players being part of their system. So to send out a player like Farriman on loan, where, I mean, it might be different this season because the 1 week loans, albeit Wigan have been reluctant to do that with certain players as well. But to send a player out on a month's loan, yes, you're giving them the minutes, but you're also taking them away from what you think is a really good home for them and a really good system and a place for them to learn. And so there was a real reluctance there. And I honestly still don't see, when French is back, what they do there, whether they're Farriman off the bench as a bit of an impact sub, whether you just try and crowbar him in somewhere. I think it's a real tough sort of decision to make. And I think even looking longer term, you're probably waiting for one of Field or French to leave the club until Farriman again then slots in and gets a number 6 shirt. Or
but both on
like
big
that.
contracts.
Exactly.
It's hard to see where that goes. But again, he's one of them like Harry Newman that's too good to play. He's getting to that period where he's too good to play reserves.
Exactly, he really is. And I think he is the kind of player that if you chuck him in reserves, he doesn't really get anything out of it because he's clearly too good for that level. I think actually on the 2 spines tonight, it's really interesting to sort of just look at them up against each other because they are different but also very strong and very similar in a way. You look at Miller and Field as the two maverick players. They've got the speed, they've got the pace, they've got the agility. They kind of players that can just come up with that magic moment. You've got Connor and Smith who are different in the way that they play the game, but very much are the linchpin of that spine, and everything goes through them first, you tend to see. You've then got Farriman and Croft, the runners in those half-back partnerships who, will play what's in front of them, aren't afraid to take the line on, step off the right foot. They've both got wicked steps. And then at 9, you've got Brad O'Neill, who again I think is a very, very important player for that Wigan side.
I was about to come on to him.
Attack and defence against either a Jared O'Connor or a Danny Levi, who again both provide different things for Leeds, but are both very good 9s in Super League. So I think, the battle between the two spines will be very intriguing.
Where do you see Brad O'Neill? Well, we talked about 3 players that are really attacking minded. Just with you saying about Brad O'Neill there, from an outside, it's more his defensive output for me that it stands strong. I mean, he's one of the top tacklers in the league. He's second amongst hookers. Well, I think it's Brendan Hands from Toulouse who's ahead of him, but. How do you, as someone who has taken that Huddersfield game or has seen a bit more of Wigan from that external point of view, how do you see his role in the Wigan side when you talked about Smith has got the structure, you've got Field and Farriman who are mavericks who can do what they like. What does Brad O'Neill bring that makes Wigan work so well that maybe previous hookers haven't been able to do? There's a reason that they're picking him over and playing him for 80 minutes and not picking Tom Forber.
He's just got an intensity that never really seems to drop, or when it does on occasion drop, I think the rest of the team does as well. He's got that impact, I think, on the side, is that if Brad O'Neill isn't at his best, Wigan aren't at their best. And I think that's very much what you've seen at points this season. Some of the plays that he comes up with, particularly in defence, where everyone else, if it's in the latter stages of a game and everyone is completely done, they're on the last legs, fatigue is properly set in, Brad O'Neill seems to be the player that is always still at it and is still there to provide those moments. You mentioned his tackling stats there. He's also only missed 20 all season, which I think there's only maybe 2 or 3 players that have got better stats than that. But I think when you put that into perspective in terms of the tackles that he has made, I'd want to say, I'd have to double check, but I'd probably say that defensive wise he's probably got the best hit rate, if that makes sense, or the best percentage when it comes to tackles completed from tackles attempted. He's
one of only a few with 90%.
Exactly.
He's up there.
Yeah, and I think that very much says a lot about him as well, is that he's such a competent and trusted defender in the middle of that side. And I think that's what you need as well from the players that are in the middle, because the amount of defensive work they go through when it comes to, opposition teams bringing it away from yardage, when they're trucking forwards up the middle, it's a constant barrage of pressure you've got, and you've got to stay firm. And he is in the middle of all of that. There's forwards, there's props there that are rotating constantly through a game, but he has become an 80-minute hooker. They do have the option, as I mentioned, Tom Forber's there if they want to play that card, and they haven't at times. Taylor Kerr will likely be on the bench tonight, you'd imagine, as well, and he's a player that can fill in anywhere in that middle region, really. He can play at loose forward, he's even played in the halves a bit at 9 if he wants to, so he's an option there. So they do have the option still to rotate Brad O'Neill, but with how consistent he is, with the engine that he's clearly got, I don't see why you would, because he is one of those few players that when it gets to 75 plus minutes, he's still relentless.
He's still going.
And those players are really hard to find sometimes. I think he's very much in the England conversation as well, by the way. I think there's a good sort of 3 or 4 hookers that are very much at the forefront of that chat, and I think it'll be really interesting to see what Brian McDermott picks when it comes to that England squad at the end of the season. I was looking this week actually at a prospective squad and just a pool of players. I reckon I've got it about 50 odd players that could comfortably make it into that squad, and it's such a competitive team. I think especially when you chuck in, and I know we're going off on a tangent here, but when you chuck in some of the NRL players that are eligible and that are available, some of the heritage players as well, even in Super League there's a couple. There's a real huge pool for McDermott to pick from. But going back to Brad O'Neill and that situation with the hookers, I think he is well in that conversation. I think Darryl Clark obviously is as well. Jez Litton is near the top of that list.
Always in that conversation.
I think it'll very much come down to what Brian McDermott is wanting from his 9. If he's wanting an 80-minute hooker, in his England squad, then Brad O'Neill is your man. If he's wanting to rotate, then it'll be Daryl Clark and Jez Litton. But I think Brad O'Neill, to sort of circle back to the point, is very much in that conversation and is crucial to what Wigan do for the full 80 minutes.
Harvey Smith as well, after
you
posting him in that conversation.
Maybe he's one for further down the line, but he's definitely in the conversation. I think he's got to be.
He absolutely has to be. And with big games coming up as well, not only have they got the Rhinos this week, but just looking briefly ahead, they've got Hull KR before taking on Hull KR in the Challenge Cup final, and then a game against Catalans afterwards. Now, it's almost four big win games. Of course, you want the silverware, but looking at how they want to revive their season, if they can get a win tonight and they can get a result against Hull KR before going to Wembley, which both will be a difficult task. I don't think many teams have beaten the same opposition and then beaten them in the major final the next week. It's going to be a real crunch time for. It's going to be the test of what this Matt Peake side looks like this year, because we know what the 2024 version was, the ultimate winners. You've got the 2025 version, which was the nearly men on a few occasions, mainly in the grand final, fell out to sort of Hull KR really. This year, these next few games, it's more the league games rather than we won't speak too much about the cup final, but 3 big games to not decide the season. I'm not going to go too melodramatic, but big games that could decide where they lie in that top 6 come the end of the year.
But Leeds are very much in the mood of spoiling the party at the minute, always. I think, and I think the Warrington game, you look at Leeds in big games this season, they've had a good handful. I think Wakefield here last time out, and I think Warrington as well here at Headingley are 2 prime examples of that. And you look at how they stood up in those games. I still think that Warrington game is one of the most impressive Leeds Rhinos performances in the last couple of years. I really, really do.
You really simply love that game.
I just thought they looked so up for it and so professional in what they did. They faced moments of setback in a game, moments of adversity within the game, and still managed to come out on the winning side. And not many Leeds teams have been able to do that, I don't think, in the past couple of years. They've got a really strong backbone of this squad. And I think this is... I think Brad Arthur was asked in his press conference this week if this is another game where the result will very much tell you where you are right now. And I don't see any reason why they can't win this one. Yes, Wigan are flying high off the back of that Challenge Cup semi, but they still have looked poor in a lot of games this season and have looked very beatable, which isn't like Wigan.
No.
And Leeds are still on that hot streak. They are still, 3 games in a row now, they've posted more than 40 points. They're the first team to put 40 points past Wakefield this season. And those are no mean feats either, given some of the opposition they've played this year. So I don't see a reason why Leeds can't win tonight. I really don't. It'll be a tough test, and it will be one of those. I think St Helens in a few weeks' time is another example of that, where it'll give them an indication of where they're at. But I still see Leeds as favourites tonight, and I think they can very much upset that Wigan party. As you mentioned there, Wigan will want to take that momentum from last week into this game, into the Hull KR game, then into the Wembley final again against Hull KR. And I think they've got a couple of teams in the middle there, one being Leeds, one being Hull KR, who can very much disrupt that rhythm.
Absolutely. And if you've not got your tickets already, nice to plug the St Helens game there, Jack. You get your tickets now. Tickets.therhinos.co.uk. If you've not already, make sure you're here for the start of June as we take on Saints in the first Thursday night game of the year, I believe.
I think you might be right there, yeah.
Always love a bit of Thursday night rugby league. But just moving back to tonight's game, and we'll round off on our head-to-head. We picked 2... We've used the word maverick enough times, but 2 different types of back rowers, both in that England conversation. I'm glad you've mentioned that England conversation, because I think this is relevant for both of these guys. We'll start with Junior Nsemba. He's only 21. He's almost got the world at his feet, really, in terms of looking at English back rowers and looking at the quality of either playing 11 or 12 that you can play. He's a guy who carries hard. I was always impressed with him, looking at him come through the grades at Wigan. Both for his hard carries, his defensive work a little bit, but just the fact that he will just take 3 or 4 people with you. What do you see about him being? And do you think he's? We've talked about the halves, but in terms of that forward pack, do you think he's a crucial member of what Wigan will be able to do tonight?
I really do. I think he's come on leaps and bounds just this year. I think you saw last season there were points at which his form dipped a bit, hence why he ended up at times coming off the bench for them, including in the grand final. Sam Walters was the preferred option there for a good chunk of time, and he's very much flipped that conversation this season as in December, and I think just that's through his own hard work and dedication, and I think he's very much maturing still as a back rower. Let's not forget he's still in his early 20s. He's still got so much growing room in all sort of aspects of his game, but I absolutely think he is a crucial part of that Wigan forward pack. He's an explosive runner, as you say. He takes defenders with him, and he is so hard to stop at times, and very much in that England conversation. He missed out on the Ashes selection last season. I think that's probably a result of how that form did dip.
Yeah.
But I think this season he's one of the starters at present. I think there's a good pool of back rowers that can be chosen or have to be picked from.
Who else is on your list, Jack? Come on.
There's so many, isn't there? There's Kai Pearce-Paul, I think, is another big one. Matty Nicholson, who is obviously over at Canberra at the minute, and James McDonnell, who is the other player that we're talking about when it comes to this head-to-head and that back row conversation. He's going to the Perth Bears next season, one of that crop of Leeds players that are alongside Ledsky and Newman, and he's just been so consistent, hasn't he, I think, since he joined the Rhinos. He came over from Wigan, incidentally, as a player who hadn't played a great deal of Super League, had played a handful of games for Wigan, but very much ended up being nudged out just as a result of the crop of players they had coming through at the time. Matty Nicholson, who has ended up at Canberra via Warrington, was another one in that same group Wigan. At a similar sort of time, that it was almost just so congested was that competition that naturally players would have to fall away, and McDonnell was one of them. And Leeds have benefited from it because, again, as I say, he's been one of the most consistent players for the Rhinos in the past couple of seasons. He's the kind of guy that is just a constant 7 out of 10 at the very least. Exactly what you're getting from him in both defence and attack. He'll run hard when you give him the ball. He'll defend hard as well on that edge. His defensive timing is often very good as well, and his positioning. He very rarely gets caught out on that right edge that he sits on. I think he's just become quietly one of Leeds' most consistent, if not the most consistent player in the past couple of seasons on that right edge. When as well, you might correct me here, Dan, but
no, go for
I can't think of a time really when he's had much of an injury issue.
No,
either.
Not at all.
He's
always in the lineup.
Just always very, very much there. He's a reliable player, and I think that's what's really been beneficial to the Rhinos is that when those team sheets are being picked by Brad Arthur, and the past few weeks are an exception because just about everyone has been fit up until this week with Jack Bird. James McDonnell has often been first name on the team sheet, I'm sure, just for the fact that, he was good last week, he was good all of the weeks before that, and he's 100% fit again, so let's put him in. And he has been such an asset to this Leeds side, and I think they will miss him a lot when he goes at the end of the year.
We absolutely will. Just backing you up on a few stats just to really hone the point in. He's 8th in terms of tackles out of back rowers. He's 3rd in offloads. Now I'm pulling offloads. Because also in December, that's part of his game, is not only can he break tackles, he's one of their leading tackle breaks along with Jay Field, no surprise there. But he leads the offload game with 19. Closer in terms of back rowers, then it's one player between December and McDonnell, and that one is Callum Watkins.
Right.
Which was a bit of a surprise when I was looking that one up, but there's a few offloads in there. But I think as well with McDonnell, what I've been impressed with in recent weeks, and this is where I'm really interested to see him come alongside Harry Newman, is he's provided those little try assists in that Warrington game for Jack Bird, in the Huddersfield game for Jack Bird. They've been on sort of the same page in terms of McDonnell breaks the line, Bird's always hanging on that outside shoulder, takes a pass in to score. Is he going to do the same with Harry Newman? You'd think he'd be able to. They've played with each other long enough, but he's introducing those little facets into his game that will just serve him so much better when he goes to Australia. Quite sad at the same time.
I agree, and I think you look at the track record of British back rowers that have gone over to the NRL and made an impact. I think John Bateman is up there as much of a divisive character as he can be at times, and the form that he sort of hits. But I think certainly when he first went over there with Canberra in particular, he was really good. Elliot Whitehead's another one. In more recent memory, Kai Pearce-Paul and Matty Nicholson, all relatively different back rowers, but all, I think, crucially, with a degree of steeliness about them, and just that ability to be able to hit into a tackle and not be driven back And McDonald fits that mould for me. You know, he's such a combative back rower that I think he will suit that NRL game, and very much follow in the footsteps of your Whiteheads, of your Pierce Pauls, of your Nicholsons.
Of Morgan Gannon.
Of Morgan Gannon as well.
Although we really would like to see him playing back for the Warriors very soon.
But even so, in the glimpses he showed in pre-season, Morgan Gannon, I think, will also very much fit that Warriors side and fit in that NRL back row mode. So I think he'll be a real success over there. In a Perth side that is gaining a bit of traction, still need a few more players, I think, but certainly there's a core of a squad there. But I think what he's done at Leeds and what he's shown that he can do at Super League, I think will translate into the NRL side. And I think that's always the difference when it comes to forwards or backs that go over to Australia, and the success rate they have is that the forwards tend to be a lot more built for that game over there, whereas the backs perhaps just struggle a bit more. Now we'll see what Harry Newman does when he goes over, and you never write a player off until they're actually in the environment. But I think McDonald and Ledsky in particular, when you look at the players that are going over to Perth, are those that I think will have the easier transition. And McDonald out of the three is probably the one that will. So I'm looking forward to seeing how he does over there. But as I say, I think it will be a loss to the Rhinos, albeit there's players there that can step into the fold in his absence. But I think it's an opportunity that he's absolutely earned, because since Leeds signed him, as I said, I think he's been one of the most consistent players.
He's been absolutely superb, and we look forward to seeing him go up against his former club tonight at the Brick Community Stadium. Now, if you're not heading down to the Brick Community Stadium, of course, you can watch the game live. That's all on the Sky Sports Action channel this week. We're not on a Plus channel, we're on Sky Sports Action, one of the main channels for you to watch. If not, if you're out and about and want to listen to all the action, our great friends always at BBC Radio Leeds have the full game covered, Jack.
Yeah, James Dayton and Phil Vive is your commentary team tonight on all BBC Radio Leeds frequencies, and also online worldwide via BBC Sound, so you can check them out there.
And of course, this will be a game you do not want to miss in any capacity, whether you're heading over to the stadium tonight. Good luck if you are, or watching or listening. It's great to have your support. Well, my thanks again to Jack Conlon for being an amazing guest. My name's Dan Hawkhead, and team news is coming next.